Can I say a really warm welcome to all of you who have joined us from so many different parts of the world for the official launch of our exciting new program, 5 Conversations to Transform Trust and Engagement at Work. This is a program very close to our hearts here at the Oxford Group. When I look back over the 25-year history of our business, it really stands out that programs to improve the quality of conversations have always been at the heart of our work. It's an area in which we've developed a specialist expertise and a deep passion, and we've brought these together in this brand new program. I'm Nigel Pearce, and I'm chairman of the Oxford Group, and I'll be your host for today's session. Alongside me, I have my two colleagues, Nick Cowley and Judy Knight. Nick's based here in the UK with me, and he's been instrumental in the design of 5 Conversations. And Judy's based in California, where she has extensive experience of delivering programs for the Oxford Group worldwide. So Nick and Judy, can I just ask each of you to say hello?
Absolutely, Nigel. So hello, everybody. I'm Nick Cowley. I've been with the Oxford Group for almost 20 years, designing solutions for clients around the world. And as Nigel says, over the past year in particular, I've been working with many of my colleagues to pool our expertise and experience to create this 5 Conversations workshop, which I will describe today, and I'm really looking forward to doing so.
And over to you, Judy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Judy Knight, and I live in California near San Francisco. I've been with the Oxford Group for 19 years and have delivered numerous programs for leaders as well as their teams around the world. A focus of both my coaching and my facilitation work is on leadership development, and a key aspect of that development has been for leaders to learn how to have authentic and meaningful conversations with their team members in order to increase motivation, engagement, and goal achievement. I'm delighted to be here with Nigel and Nick to talk with you about the 5 Conversations program.
That's great. Thanks very much, Nick, and thanks, Judy. So here's what we have in store for you over the next hour or so. Firstly, we want to talk to you about the power of conversations at work to build trust and engagement, and review some of the latest research that links deeper employee engagement to superior business performance. Next, we'd like to take you briefly through what the 5 Conversations actually are, and then describe the 3 core principles that make this a uniquely powerful program. And then we'll share with you a global case study to show the results that can be achieved from a program that focuses on conversations to drive engagement. And then we'll finish off with a live Q&A session that involves you, and the total runtime will be 60 minutes, and we will finish on the hour. So just before we get started properly, I wanted to say that we would love this to be a really interactive session. So at any time, please do type questions that you have into the Q&A facility at the bottom right-hand side of the screen and send it to all panelists. I'll keep a lookout for these, and where possible, we'll try and answer them as we go, but if not, we'll come back to them at the Q&A session at the end. So, to get started, let's go right to the heart of it. Nick, could you just summarize what 5 Conversations actually is?
Absolutely, Nigel. So 5 Conversations, in a nutshell, is this new and inspiring program, which is about enabling managers to develop more trusting and successful relationships at work. And we believe that results in stronger employee engagement, and as you said, we know that transforms individual and business performance.
Thanks, Nick. And employee engagement is absolutely where we want to start this session. Typically, employee engagement is defined as having 3 key features. The first is a sense of organizational citizenship. That's to say, being proud to be part of your organization and a sense of belonging. Secondly, a willingness to give discretionary effort, to go the extra mile, to put those extra hours in when needed. And thirdly, an intention to stay, coupled with a belief that you've got room to grow and fulfill your career ambitions inside the organization. And everything we know and all the research points to the fact that the higher employee engagement is rated by employees, the more successful the organization will be, whether that's in terms of sales, profit, return on investment, or customer satisfaction.
And I think, like many of the people who are listening in today, Nigel, we've been aware, I think now for many years, that the evidence linking employee engagement to organization success has been growing steadily And certainly over here in Europe and in the UK in particular, there was a major report came out just under 12 months ago, which talked about this, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. Because there is lots of evidence that this link is there. This report was called "Nailing the Evidence." It's a major report sponsored by the UK government and published in 2012, as you say, Nick, and contains a number of key facts. So I just want to pull out a few of those. The first report from Hay shows that almost all of the world's most admired companies believe that employee engagement gives them a real competitive advantage. The second is a study from Connexa, and this shows the link between employee engagement and net income and return to shareholders. And I'll just pause and let you scan that information there. And then the third is a report from Aon Hewitt, which shows that organizations with high employee engagement outperformed the stock market with returns to shareholders 22% higher than average.
And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the evidence that's in the report as well, Nigel. And
exactly.
And it's very much food for thought. If you haven't seen that report, it's definitely worth getting hold of. You can see the reference in the corner there. So I think you're making a good case as to why employee engagement links to organizational success. Maybe you could just say a bit more about where 5Conversations comes in and how we arrived at that as part of the solution.
Yeah, sure, Nick. So the link to 5Conversations is with the factors that drive employee engagement. So what are the factors that enable and drive employee engagement? But before I show you what the research has discovered, we thought it would be interesting just to get your views today as an audience of what actually drives employee engagement. So we're going to do a quick interactive session at this point. So the question is, what drives employee engagement? So could you type your ideas into the chat box on the right-hand side and then send to all participants? And given the numbers of people on the webinar, it would be more manageable if you can limit your response to just one factor, please. So type your idea into the chat box and then press send. And it'll be interesting to see what type of ideas you come up with. So we're ready and waiting for your input.
And all participants is in the drop-down menu, I think, Nigel, isn't it, as well?
Yes, that's right. So if you look at the send to, okay, so somebody said trust, absolutely. Trust is a key element that will drive engagement, having a sense of purpose, absolutely. Quality of leadership critically, and that links as well to line management and a sense of and effective communication. Yeah, coming back to purpose. Flow is a good one, and absolutely feeling valued is critical to feeling engaged, and having a sense of making a difference. So absolutely, I think we'd agree with all of those. And again, here's another one, leadership. Absolutely. So certainly a theme here about quality of leadership, quality of management, quality of communication, and somebody just also put up having a meaningful job, which itself is a function of the way that often managers structure work. So great, a really wide range of ideas that definitely map on to the research. And thank you, somebody's put up good conversations, which obviously is part of what we think as well. I don't know whether Nick or Judy, you've got any comments or thoughts on any of that input.
Well, just one from me. It's always really rich, Nigel, and in all the research we've done, it's been like that. And it strikes me always that organizations and people within them are really clear about what engagement is and their desire to get it. And then there's just this gap between the aspiration often and the realization. I think that's the really interesting thing for me about how you actually make it happen.
Yeah, I completely agree, Nick. Sorry, Judy.
And Nigel, also, some of the comments about, good conversations, recognition, empowerment, feeling valued, those are all things that come from a good relationship with the manager, which is the primary reason, bad manager is the primary reason why people leave an organization. So I think those connections really come back to what we're talking about today.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Judy, because it's often said that you join an organization but leave a manager.
Yes.
So yeah, totally agree with that. Great. So really, as you say, Nick, a rich set of answers there. So let me move back to the research and just try and map some of the things you've said onto the findings from this most recent report. So the report identified 4 factors which enable or drive high levels of employee engagement. So let me just quickly take you through those. The first they defined as visible and empowering leadership. So visible and empowering leadership. And this is where leaders set a clear direction, they communicate with consistency and authenticity, and create conditions for every employee to be involved and empowered. The second they defined as engaging managers. That's managers who focus their people and give them scope to innovate and to contribute. Treat their people as individuals, and in particular build individual relationships with their people, and finally coach and stretch and develop their people. Thirdly, that the voice of the employee is heard. In other words, that views and opinions don't just flow downwards from the top down to the bottom of the organization, but also flow back up the organization. And finally, that there's a sense of organizational integrity, which is defined as where the values on the wall are reflected in people's day-to-day behaviors. Now, I know, Nick, that you were talking the other day to David McLeod, who is the author of this report, and I think he had some quite strong views on this, which you could share with us.
Yeah, just to say, we are in contact with David McLeod, and I think this research was published last December. He's done even more research since then, including in other parts of the world, and he was just really keen to make the point that these 4 factors are remarkably consistent and reliable and do emerge time after time, and apparently in all geographic locations, as the key drivers of employee engagement. So I think he was just reconfirming that this is actually the thing to be focusing on, Nigel.
Yeah.
And by the way, for people who are interested and they haven't heard of this organisation, to find out more about David's work and that of the task force, as well as explore, they've got a lot of resources on their website. The place to go is www.engageforsuccess, all one word, .org, www.engageforsuccess.org. Thanks,
Nick. And so just to come back to your original question, what's the link? The link is that, in short, we believe that these 5 conversations make a major contribution to bringing each of these factors to life, especially, number 2, helping line managers to engage with their teams. And we think these conversations are just a critical component of a manager's day-to-day activities to make this happen. And we think these conversations, if they're held with integrity and a positive intent, really do contribute to building a more trusting relationship, thus contributing to employee engagement. So just to really summarize where we've got to in these first few minutes of this session, we call it a sort of chain reaction, where the relationship with the line manager contributes to superior employee engagement, which itself drives outstanding business performance, and where we're focused is on the basic building block of building trust through really high quality, authentic, effective conversations. So that's really the argument that we're building at this point.
Thanks, Nigel.
So Nick, over to you.
Yeah, and Judy, I just thought this would be a good point to bring in a different perspective. What's your view from where you sit, Judy?
From the U.S. perspective, Nick, and what we're doing here in the U.S., as you know, recently the Gallup organization published a report called The State of the American Workplace. So it kind of coincides with what you were saying about the UK report that was released. They reported similar findings linking engagement with the organizational earnings. What was a little bit interesting was that they also noted that companies in the U.S. that had engaged workforces seemed to have recovered from the recent recession at a faster rate. So I thought that was a really interesting aspect of engagement that we can see. So 2 examples from the U.S. Based companies that demonstrate this connection between engagement and business results are Zappos and Beam. Zappos is an online shoe retailer, which I have been a frequent customer of, and it is consistently recognized for high employee engagement. It appears on a number of best places to work lists every year. And they promote a very unique culture that puts employee engagement first, and then they know that the profits will follow. And the other company, Beam, is a U.S.-based global premium spirits company. And every year they conduct an employee engagement survey, which provides the information to the line managers to enable them to meet with their team members on a regular basis to develop initiatives that maintain and improve the engagement scores. Engagement is also one of their key leadership practices and is addressed as part of their leadership development programs. So that's just a couple of examples of companies here in the U.S. that have really embraced the whole engagement and the connection between the manager and the employee.
That's great, Judy. And we've got examples over here as well. In fact, one of the clients we work with, Sainsbury's, has also made that link very clearly between engagement and business performance. So I guess our experience has been, Nigel, wherever we've worked in the world, that this does seem to be a common and universal need, this link between engagement and performance.
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. So thanks for that. So just to summarize, really, I think what we're saying is that this is a real need, but all of our experience also tells us that managers, team leaders, directors, VPs often don't have the insights or the courage or the time or sometimes the knowledge to hold these authentic, honest, two-way conversations. And in fact, it seems to us that in today's work environment, where we're surrounded by jargon and processes and performance management and social media and email, we've forgotten a simple truth, which is the power of authentic, two-way human conversations to build relationships, trust, engagement at work. And it does seem to us that this is a fundamental truth, because throughout human history, people have talked to each other face to face, using gesture and touch and smiles and frowns, sharing hopes and fears to build trust and relationships and collaboration and to get things done. That's what human beings do. And really, 5Conversations is intended to take this simple truth about communication back to its roots, but overlaid with a contemporary neuroscience underpinning, which we'll come on to, and a very practical focus that keeps human emotions at its core. And that's what the program is really about. So at this point, we want to move on and actually talk to you about what the 5Conversations really are. So Nick, you're going to lead off on this one, so back to you.
Yeah, absolutely, Nigel. So we're just going to take time to briefly talk you through each of the conversations, what they are, a little bit about what we do on the program and how we think they can be helpful. So the first conversation is, you may not be surprised, about establishing a trusting relationship. And actually for us, this is the foundation stone for everything that follows. So this conversation, to pick up your theme, is about having the courage to talk to a colleague about who we are and what matters to us, to be genuinely interested and curious in the other person. So it's about setting an intention to be open, straightforward and positive in our relationships with others, and having an initial conversation to begin this. And I think what's interesting is that in our view, it's never too late to have this initial conversation, because in our experience, people can work together for years and never have or take the time or the courage to establish a trusting relationship. Yet we know, and I suspect you know, that by doing so, they can really transform their relationship and achieve significantly more together. And you've mentioned trust, Nigel. We believe, particularly with this conversation, that trust, the way we describe it, is both the fuel into and the output from these high-quality conversations, and this one in particular. In other words, the more trust that exists, the better the quality of the conversation, and the better the quality of the conversation, the more trust that develops. So on the program, what we do is we set people up to have open and trusting conversations with each other, because what we want to do is for people to know how it feels, both to lead these conversations and to receive them. And taking it to the workplace, participants, we encourage them to hold this conversation to refresh or renew a relationship, and it's particularly relevant at the start of a new year or a new project or when new people are coming on board. So that's the first thing about this first conversation.
Thanks, Nick. And I just add that I'm struck every time we run this program what a simple but deeply powerful conversation this is, and yet how rarely does it actually happen at work. And time and again, we've seen people open up to each other and talk about the conditions they need for trust and realize this is something they've never actually shared with the key people around them or asked others about. So we think it's a profound conversation, really.
It's about knowing it's important, I think, Nigel, and having a conversation that isn't always about a specific task as well. That's
absolutely
what it's about. Setting the scene. Yeah.
Okay. To keep moving, Nick, you're going to pick up number 2.
Yeah. So the second conversation we've called Agreeing Mutual Expectations. And this conversation has 2 key elements: being clear on what we're trying to achieve at work and why, critically why, and secondly, the expectations we can reasonably hold of other people in helping us to achieve those outcomes. So having said that, it's also about the expectations that they can hold of us in achieving their aims. So it's definitely playing to that point in the engagement around the voice of the organization as well.
Yeah.
So we believe that by adopting this approach for ourselves and with other people, it just elevates goal setting far beyond the usual and often uninspiring round of writing objectives that takes place in most organizations, and introduces a new dynamic element more about mutual accountability. So on the program, we encourage participants to think about what they're looking to achieve at work and why, and to try this out by actually bouncing that off each other in a quick fire sessions with others to see how it lands, to see what reaction and what impact it causes on the other people. And then they go on to think about people at work who are critical to the success of these aims and what expectations they can set from them. And again, this is particularly important at work when planning for a new project or task, building a coalition, or setting up a team. So we do think it is quite a key one. And Judy, you had a couple of thoughts about it as well.
Yes, Nick. Actually, I have an example of what happens when people don't have that second conversation. I was coaching a vice president in a national health care provider, and she was expressing her frustration with and disappointment in the performance of one of her direct reports, who is a pretty senior manager. And when I asked the vice president about the conversations that she had conducted with the manager about mutual expectations, her reply to me was, well, at his level, he should just know what I expect. And surprisingly, or not, I've encountered this with a number of executives recently that I've been working with. And it always reduces their frustration when they sit down, have the conversation about mutual expectations, and then they have a platform and a foundation to be able to hold each other accountable. And the little light bulbs go off when we actually say that and get them to the point of having those conversations. So I love second conversation.
Great, thanks very much, Judy. And I just want to come back to also something that Nick, you said at the beginning, because we see this as so much richer and deeper conversation than what so often happens in a performance management cycle, where it's simply what are your objectives is the sort of is the conversation. Particularly because, as Nick said at the beginning, we've introduced this link to purpose, this idea of are you able to articulate not just what your objectives are, but why you are doing, trying to achieve what you're trying to achieve. What's the underlying purpose? And we think that this gives it a depth that is really important. So thanks, Nick and Judy, for that. And I think on the third conversation, Judy, you're going to pick this one up. So over to you.
Yes, so conversation 3 is about showing genuine appreciation. It's another conversation that we believe is really missing in most organizations and between a manager and his or her direct reports. It's not the same as giving feedback, which in our experience, and I'm sure in your experience, has become sort of tired and misused, and most of us sort of get anxious about giving it, let alone receiving it, which often causes defensiveness for people. So the other element that's missing from this feedback is a sense of personal or emotional commitment and ownership. So in this conversation, we encourage people to identify and explore areas of strengths in others, to explore the potential for making more of these strengths in other contexts, and to offer genuine appreciation for things. That way, we appreciate what others do and say and how they've had a positive impact on us or on the team. And that genuine appreciation is just kind of brings people to understand and acknowledge their strengths and what they've been doing well that other people appreciate about them.
Thanks, Nancy. And just to build on that, one of the challenges we give to participants on the program is a question which was, when was the last time you showed genuine appreciation to somebody at work? And pause, and of course people sit there and look at each other and look puzzled, and often think, actually, it's been a very long time since I did that. So one of the challenges for people is to go back to work and identify the people who deserve for you to show them some genuine appreciation. And the model that we use to underpin this conversation is appreciative inquiry, so that people are, rather than using the normal sort of deficit, what's wrong conversation, are actually looking at what's going right and identifying the skills and talents that is enabling somebody to be successful, and then going on to say where else can, not only thank you so much for the contribution you're making, but where else can these skills and talents be deployed. So that's the third conversation. Nick, over to you for the fourth.
Yeah, and the fourth, in some ways, is the other side of the coin around needing to talk to people about something that's happening, and we call it challenging and helpful behavior. And it's just so important when people, whoever they are, do and say things which are having a particularly negative impact on us, or which are preventing us from doing what we're trying to do, from achieving what we're trying to do. And our experience, again, is that many organizations, these behaviors are ignored or minimized to a point until it becomes a real issue or a breakdown occurs. So on the program, we use some of the principles of nonviolent communication, which some of you might be familiar with. And we encourage participants to have conversations by being very clear about what the other person has said or done that is unhelpful in a very specific and factual way. That's phase one. Secondly, by revealing the emotional impact this has on us. And then thirdly, leading to a request for change. Now, those of you who know this approach, this is a very assertive and potentially very powerful approach, which once again requires a basis of trust and also generates it. And on the program, we provide an opportunity to try out this approach, first in a simulation, and then giving participants the chance to try it out with another based on a conversation they want to have back at work. And at work, this conversation could be held as part of a planned project or progress review. Of course, that's a perfect opportunity to do it. But it's just as valid and just as appropriate when there is an urgent need to actually do something and take action to correct course in a relationship or how we're dealing with people. So we think it's a simple but a very tough thing to do, and with maximum, that has a maximum impact.
Thanks, Nick. And just to reinforce, what we found is that the model of nonviolent communication is accessible, and people can internalize it and use it quite quickly as a powerful way to, as you said, Nick, express people's feelings, request a change in behavior, whilst maintaining a positive and respectful two-way relationship. And that's the underpinning philosophy of nonviolent communication. So we think it's really appropriate to give people the capability to have this conversation at work. And Nick, I know you're going to pick up the final conversation as well, number 5.
And last and definitely not least is building for the future, the conversation we call building for the future. And again, it's another area I think we spot that people tend to avoid. It's about talking to others about hopes and fears and aspirations for the future. So let me put it this way. We may hope and wish that the people who work for us and our employees are fully engaged and committed, taking your point, Judy, about churn and long-term commitment, and that they want to develop their careers further with us. But how often do we actually talk about this, and in particular, really encourage openness about future hopes and aspirations? And when we were developing this program, one phrase struck us that we really like, and it's this question, to put it another way: do you know the future career aspirations of your people as well as a headhunter does? And I think that's a really good question to ask in your organization. So what we do in 5Conversations is show people how a simple but structured approach they can use to actually get into this discussion as to future areas of focus for their team members, for their colleagues. And by doing so, look for opportunities to help them realize these ambitions within the organization. And if that isn't possible, ensure that any future transition is planned and open, and as far as it can be, win-win. And again, at work, this can be part of a planned career or development review, but actually, I think this might be more useful and productive handled separately, because it actually links directly, I think, to the evidence from the research at the start of this, Nigel, around engagement, where employees really want to be noticed and feel listened to and feel as though there's some response from the organisation. I think this plays very much into that space.
Absolutely, and feel as if they're an individual and have an individual relationship with their line manager. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
and Nick, I also know that some people are probably asking about these conversations and how it relates to especially the millennials who are so comfortable with more of the texting and the non conversations. And this particular conversation is so important to them because they are really focused on their growth and their development and where they're going to go in the future in any job and how it connects to their desires and the flexibility that they're looking for. So this is really, really a key one that I think even connects past that initial level with different generations.
Great.
So I appreciate we haven't spent long on each one, but the aim here and the aim in presenting them to you today is that the aim of all 5 conversations is to encourage people to see the value in developing more trusting relationships at work, provide them with some frameworks to help them plan and have the conversations and try them out in real time so they know what it feels like. And although each of them, I think, has a value in its own right, as we've sort of explained as we go through, I actually think the real power is in the combination of the 5. And so, although we're not prescriptive, and certainly it isn't meant to be a sequential order that you must follow them through in order 1 to 5, what we're saying is select the relationships that are really key to you to develop more trust and the basis for working together, and then make sure you cover all of the 5 topics in some way over a period of time. And of course, the more you do it, as you said, Nigel, the more flexible you'll get around this, and the more you can actually incorporate different conversations as you go.
Great, thank you, Nick. So at this point, we thought we'd like to do a quick poll, again, to involve you briefly, to get your views on which of these 5 conversations is most needed now in your business. So what we're going to do is put up on the right-hand side of the screen a quick poll, a multiple-choice question, where you'll have the opportunity to click on one of the 5 conversations. And the question is, which of these conversations is most needed in your business at the moment. So we'll just wait for a second until that poll screen appears. There it is. So you've got about 30 seconds to click on one of those 5 conversations. And the question is, which do you believe is most needed now in your organization? And you might well say that you think they're all needed. And I think we'd all probably agree that working life would be better if they were all happening. But what we'd like you to do is just get is fix on one. And of course, one of the findings that we often, one of the pieces of feedback people often give us is they do say, well, actually, performance management is meant to generate all of these conversations, but actually, the ritual and the form filling and the whole performance management process actually gets in the way of these conversations happening authentically. So their power is lost, and therefore people feel they don't really happen at all. So I think we have closed the poll, and now on the screen you can see the results. And that's very interesting. We did a similar webinar this morning, and again, the one that's come out as the most needed, interestingly, is that last one, Building for the Future. And that's really curious because that's the one that came out as most needed this morning. We having asked this question many times, we often hear that it's contextual. People often say to us that when an organization is in change or when there are new teams, it's often the first 2, establishing a trusting relationship and the mutual expectations that are important. 3 and 4 are more important in more stable environments. And as Judy, you touched on, working with Gen Y and millennial teams, conversation 5 tends to be especially important. So I don't know whether that reflects the makeup of the organizations we have represented here today, but it's interesting that it's a similar result. So thank you for that. I don't know whether, again, Nick or Judy, you've got any quick comments on that at this point?
No, I don't think so, Nigel.
Okay, all right.
No, me, Nigel. It's just interesting, as you say, that in the 2 webinars today, it has been that conversation 5, which has come out as the strongest, and that hasn't always been the case in the research that we've been doing. So I guess it absolutely is contextual, and it does, show the relevance of all 5 of them, actually.
Yeah, that's great. Okay.
One thing to add, Nigel, I think about the establishing a trusting relationship. There was an article in Forbes magazine recently that somebody was giving a talk and asked for people to write down the 3 people they trusted most in their lives, and nobody put their manager down, which was not a big surprise. And it really brought up then, okay, so why not, and what's going on, and what do you need to do about that?
Yeah.
So I think that establishing a trusting relationship is a core theme.
Is also core. That's great, Judy. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, the next thing I said we would cover is 3 core principles that we think give this particular program and the shape it has in the way we've designed it, its power and its sustainability and its lasting impact. So, Nick, over to you to pick up the first of these, which is about the neuroscience underpinning the program.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. That's a picture of me, isn't it?
That's your brain, Nick, yes.
A brain, yeah. So, as I'm sure many of you are, we've been struck in the past few years about the fascinating work that's coming out from the area of neuroscience and the brain, and in particular how we process information and make decisions. And it's been growing exponentially. There's an awful lot of stuff out there. We've been particularly working actually with a guy called Professor Paul Brown, who some of you might know about, and his work in this field. And for those of you who don't, there's a particularly interesting and user-friendly book, actually, Neuropsychology for Coaches, which Professor Paul Brown has written, and I'm sure we can give you that link afterwards if you're interested. So, Nigel, this slide summarizes some of the key learning that we're taking from neuroscience. I mean, what we've been mindful of is that for the managers and leaders coming on this program, they're not coming on a Neuroscience 101. So we've been careful to make sure that what we pull and what we adopt is usable, is well researched, and actually is going to add to their understanding of how to build relationships at work. And I'll just let you scan through some of the points on here, because this slide really summarizes for us the key learning as it relates to these 5 conversations in particular. And really, when we boil it all down, we're really keen that participants understand there are things they can do to build deep rapport with other people and trust, which enables more open and collaborative conversations to take place. And in that sense, I think particularly bullets 4 and 5 are particularly key. Understanding, and now we know that our basic approach as human animals is to approach and maximize rewards and to avoid and minimize risk, and we know that. And secondly, we know that when there is this deep trust and rapport in a relationship, we are open to ideas, possibilities, and collaboration, and then we're really into doing things together at work. And I just thought to bring it to life, I'll give you a specific example. And David Rock is another really interesting and well-known guy in this field who's done a lot of research and reported a lot of his findings. I just wanted to take a moment to tell you about his work on status and how status can affect the emotional connection between 2 people. So by status, we mean relative importance or the pecking order or the seniority. And as humans, we have this idea, this representation of status, all the time in relation to other people when we're in conversation. We're not aware of it, but we're sensing what's the relative status between us here. And that will affect our mental processes in many ways. And it's not just about the obvious things. It's not just about, are you more senior than me in the organization? It's not just about where we're sitting or holding the conversation. Status here is about the things that we do and say which have the effect of elevating the status of the other one or equally reducing it. So what David Rock has shown is that our sense of status goes up when we feel better than another person. And we know what's happening here, and what he tells us is that the primary reward circuitry is activated, in particular the striatum. And the striatum increases dopamine levels. And why this matters is that dopamine is a neurotransmitter that helps control the brain's reward and pleasure centers. Dopamine also helps regulate movement and emotional responses, and it enables us not only to see rewards, but to take action and move towards them. So in other words, an increase in status, our perception of status, is shown in the brain to generate a more positive response to what's being promoted and to the other person. And equally, looking at it from the other direction, the perception of a potential or real reduction in status can and will generate a strong threat response. And again, that will reduce our willingness to engage and be open. And some really interesting research that's reported on a reduction in status resulting from being left out of an activity, just being left out of an activity, when that was tracked, actually lit up the same regions of the brain as physical pain. So that's how strong that, if you like, social dimension of status is in terms of how it affects the brain. So I just give that as an example how we don't go into the inner workings of all of these elements. But in 5Conversations, we think it's best to use the best of the published research to show how in practical ways we can modify our behavior to establish a basis for a more open and trusting conversation. And that's what we try and do by making some of this research practical for people.
Thanks, Nick. That's great. And I think we found, haven't we, this adding this is just a new dimension to people's understanding of the profound impact of their often unconscious words and behaviour on other people. Thanks, Nick. That's great. So what's the second underlying principle?
Well, the second thing that we were particularly keen with this program, not for the sake of it, but because in order to get the outcomes, in order for people to get the outcomes that they want, Nigel, is that these conversations aren't actually primarily about skills improvement. Practicing having them is important, of course it is, and preparing to have them and practicing is important. But for us, the approach here is much more about helping people develop the mindset and the positive intention to actually want to and hold the conversations back at work. Because our belief with this work is that if these conditions are in place, then it's the integrity and the sincerity of the conversation that will be felt by the other person, and is almost certain to generate a reciprocal response. In other words, they'll respond in a similar way. So for us, these conversations aren't about doing them well. It's not about practicing the skill to a point where it becomes slick and something you can do without thinking. In fact, it's the opposite. We want people to do these conversations with thought and with feeling, and as a result, they may not be slick, but they certainly will feel to have integrity and sincerity in the way that they're being practiced, and as such will have that positive impact on the unconscious. We know these conversations are in some ways very simple and obvious, and actually I think that's their power, because in reality they do happen so rarely at work. So our approach has been not to teach people to follow a process, but instead to have the desire and courage to hold them authentically in their own style. And so even on the program, we don't feed back on the skill in which people carry out, the various conversations that they try with each other. What we'd rather encourage is a genuine reaction and an appreciation of what impact it's made on the other person, that's working with them on the workshop. So, and just finally on this one, just to say, as you mentioned earlier, Nigel, therefore, I think this can be seen as an alternative to traditional performance management. So very complementary, but not the same. It's supportive of processes that people need to comply with in organizations and of various processes and so on. But we think it is a different style of conversation which enables those processes to be handled ever so more effectively.
Thanks, Nick. I think also it's a great application of what we've always known and practiced, that in order to get emotional commitment to change, you need to touch people at all three levels of head, hand, and heart. I think that's another way of saying that. So that's great. So Nicola, what's the third core?
Yeah, and I'm conscious of time, so I'll keep moving, Nigel.
Yeah.
I mean, the third is just about the dynamics of the program itself. So we deliberately use the group of participants themselves as a testing ground for trying out and responding to these conversations. So each of them is explored and tried out in real time. People get the experience of both holding and receiving them. And so it's not role play. There are several opportunities to really stretch, explore, and sort of consolidate the learning. So people really experience what it means to have real interactions, make real human connections, and we know from the piloting we've done of this sort of really lands with people and makes a difference for them.
That's great, Nick. Thanks very much for talking us through that. So what we promised you in the final section was a case study, and I want to quickly run through that in just a couple of minutes so that we have time we leave a good amount of time at the end for Q&A, which is also what we promised. So the origins of this program, beyond the work we've always done in the Oxford Group on enabling people to have effective conversation, the roots were that in 2007, AstraZeneca, the global pharmaceutical business, was engaged in a major transformation process called Good to Great in R&D to accelerate the movement of new drugs through the R&D pipeline from drug discovery through to commercial application. And they identified 5 specific conversations that were not happening either well enough or at all between R&D leaders and members of their teams. And they believed that if these conversations could be instilled into these leaders and actually held in practice with authenticity, it would drive higher levels of employee engagement and thus contribute to improved output and performance. So we were fortunate to be commissioned to create what became a bespoke workshop, and it became known as Constructive Conversations. And this eventually rolled out to 1,400 line managers in AstraZeneca R&D operations worldwide. It was a 2-day workshop, and it set out to give leaders the tools, the insights, and most of all, the self-confidence and the emotional commitment to actually hold these 5 specific conversations. We got exceptional immediate feedback, and on the next slide, I'll show you some of the longer-term results that were achieved. But really, since September 2012, what we've been doing is taking the learning from the AZ program and enhancing it with our learning from other sources to build this 5 Conversations program, which we're launching now. So just some of the impact after 1 year, and again, it's just notable to say this: the client went back to participants on this program a full 12 months after they'd attended the program to get their reaction to it. And so in a number of dimensions, in terms of behavior change, in terms of themselves as line managers, over half of the participants said it was the most impactful piece of development they had ever had in the whole of their career. In terms of performance improvement, it was rated as having had a major impact on helping team members to find their own solutions, to develop their strengths. And 100% of people said that as a result, their personal efficiency had improved. In terms of business impact, many people identified significant impacts on business performance. And then perhaps most significantly of all, AZ were able to correlate uplifts in employee engagement in the teams where line managers had attended the program by comparison with teams where line managers had yet to attend, with nearly 60% saying the program had definitely helped them to improve their engagement ratings, which was we felt and AZ felt was an outstanding performance. So that's a quick case study, and I think now over to you, Nick, finally.
Yeah, and again, I'm just conscious of pulling it together, Nigel, just to say we've talked a lot about what the conversations are. How do people access it? Well, what we've developed to meet different needs, actually, is 3 main ways in which people can access these 5 conversations. I guess the core is we've developed a 2-day workshop for managers and for leaders, and that runs over 2 consecutive days, is the normal model. We've developed separately a 1-day masterclass. We think this is just as relevant, and indeed may be even more relevant for senior executives and directors. So there's a 1-day version there for them. And we've also developed a 3-day train-the-trainer accreditation program, because we know increasingly a lot of our clients want to take this sort of thing in-house and develop it and have the capability to run it out themselves. So they're the 3 ways in which you can access the program.
That's great, Nick. Thank you very much. And thank you all, so many of you, for sticking with us. And we've reached the place where we'd like to do a Q&A session. And you've already generated a number of questions which we'll come to during the session. But please, if you do have more, do go to the Q&A panel and send them through to us. So the first question we have, and Nick, I wonder if you could pick this one up for us. It's from Dawn, and Dawn says, what would be the catalyst for these conversations? She says, surely they need to be grounded in some kind of tangible reason for meeting. I just wonder how you'd respond to that, Nick.
I think my response to Dawn, is yes and no, actually. So I think, if I can explain, I think one way of looking at these conversations is there are already a number of set-piece opportunities that managers and leaders have during the year when they will sit down with their team members or with other colleagues, and whether it's setting up a project, whether it's setting objectives, whether it's reviewing performance. And I think one way to look at these conversations is actually those sorts of set pieces could be handled differently going forward. So we know that bringing this style and this flavour to existing set pieces is one way to do it. I think though, the other thing I would like to say, back to my first point on the first conversation, is it's never too late to have an initial conversation. And certainly some of the breakthroughs that we've had in some of the piloting is people realizing that for just some reason they've got into a box, if you like, in their relationship with another person where they just don't talk about things. And many of the insights that the people on the programs have developed so far is that I really want to have a new sort of relationship with that person. So in terms of the prompt or the instigation, I think it starts with the intention and the realization that we can do so much more together if we had a different sort of conversation. Now, I know that's a challenge, especially if we've worked with people for 10 years or 15 years. And one of the things we do cover on the program in more time is, particularly for that first conversation, how do you go about actually setting the scene or even initiating having that conversation, because we know that can be difficult as well. So I think it's a yes and no, and I think there are things to hang it on, and I think it's okay to also just decide you're going to reboot or refresh a relationship.
And Nick, I think to build on that, your earlier mention of mindset, that once people go through the program and they're conscious of this, they actually start to see opportunities to have these kinds of conversations, because it's in their head now. And so I think it's that mindset, it's that consciousness, and it's bringing that up to reality with them. So that's what I've seen.
Great, thanks, Judy, as well. Okay, another question. Maybe I'll direct this to Nick as well. From Philippa, she says, does this work well with first-line managers as well as more senior managers?
It's a good question. It's a good question, and we in developing it, we've looked at it from both ends, really. So as I alluded earlier, Philippa, that if they're up for it, we definitely see the value in senior groups going through this. And indeed, one of the questions earlier today was, the potential for this as an intact team or a senior team going through, which is perhaps something I might come back to. I think if senior people get it and they're prepared to go through the process and really establish the mindset, not only is it a power for good in how they work with each other and their people, but it sort of sends a cultural message, I think, about the things that are important here. Having said that, we do genuinely believe that this program is a power for good for all managers and organizations. And I think and we do a lot of work, as some of you might know, at the first line manager level. I think my only caveat to that is there are certain things that first line managers just need to know and need to be able to do as well, I think. And so it's an alternative to some of the other development and some of the other things that managers need to know and to be able to do. I think a certain degree of maturity, I guess is the way I'd summarize it, that there has to be a degree of maturity entering into this program, because clearly you can tell from the way that we've described it, this isn't just something that people go through and emerge at the other end and they're different. There's got to be a willingness and a preparedness to engage on this. And I think my test is the maturity of the people who are going through it, as opposed to necessarily the level that they're at, Nigel.
Okay, thanks, Nick. So there's another question from Corinne, which I'll just briefly pick up. I'm not sure if I've understood the question correctly, but Corinne says, why not spread out the training? I'm taking this to mean a different question from the one you've just answered, Nick, which we have considered, which is this just a 2-day program? Yeah. And the answer is no, it's not just a 2-day program. We haven't mentioned here because there wasn't time, but there's a full wraparound of support and embedding options around this program, because we know, as all of you know, that to get sustained change in behavior, you need to engage before a program through a pre-work and other methods, and you need to have multiple options for embedding afterwards in terms of action learning or one-to-one coaching or support groups or buddying and that type of support. So all of those features are part of the offer. We just chosen the time we had today not to go into detail about them, but they are absolutely important to us, critically important to us in the design. Okay, there's a question about how applicable and adaptable this program or these conversations are in different cultures, and I just wondered, Judy, if you can have a go at that one from your experience of working with different cultural groups.
I think in some cultures it's fairly straightforward and easy. In some of the others, like in Asia, it's a bit less direct. And so for working with some of the Asian groups that we've worked with and some people in India, it takes a little bit more relationship building to be able to what's the right word, to be able to have the right to have some of these conversations. On the other hand, the things like the mutual expectations and building for the future are things that a lot of people are looking for no matter where they are. And so I think it's some of the more sensitive ones you might have to earn some time to have those conversations. The others, people are really seeking for. So I think it's to different degrees in different cultures, and it's just working within those differences.
Absolutely, Judy, and I think we've also found that it's particularly the quality of the facilitation that enables you to build trust in the workshop itself. And certainly on the session we ran this morning, we had our colleague Nancy Wang, who's based in Beijing, talking about how effectively she'd seen this work with Chinese groups in China. So I think, as you say, Judy, it's the different environments, but absolutely it can work. And it's a conversation is a cross-cultural human certainty, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think a lot of people are craving more conversation.
Absolutely, craving more conversations and to be heard and to be listened to and to be allowed to contribute. Absolutely. Nick, were you going to add something on?
No, I was just going to make the point you did about Nancy this morning. No, that's fine.
Okay. Well, one final one then, which I think Nick you did pick up this morning, which was which is Jack has asked is about how effective can these conversations happen with remote teams.
Yeah.
And are they still the same conversations?
Yeah, and it's a really good question. And of course, many of us do work remotely now, and have these, have that as a part of our working life. There's a dilemma, I think, Jack, in this one, in that because of the very human nature of what we've tried to put across here, and because of the way our brains work and the way that we pick up signals from this whole human in front of us, I think we have to accept that there are limitations to how much of that can be transmitted across a distance, if that's all you do. And certainly, even in our work in remote coaching, for example, we pretty much always ensure that somewhere along the line there's a face-to-face, human-to-human interaction as a basis for setting the tone of that relationship. And certainly, in another of our programs, which is managing remote teams, trust is a major feature of that, and we do say that it is critical that as part of establishing the basis for the working relationships, there has to be some face-to-face time. So I would love to say that you could just pick this up and use it across distance without ever seeing each other face-to-face. I think a lot of it does work remotely, and certainly once the relationship is established, I think a lot of it works from a distance. That's absolutely the case. But I do also believe there has to be a point in the time at which there's some true human interaction around this as well, Nigel.
And Nick, a number of the clients that I've been working with, if they're large clients, they often have video conferencing, and the smaller clients are using Skype and FaceTime and the technology to be able to have those conversations, even if they can't be actually in person. And I agree with you. Once you do have that personal connection, then it makes it easier to have those conversations later. But at least you can get some of that body language signal.
I think, and I know it's not always feasible, it's not always easy, Jude, but I think the bottom line is if you've decided this relationship is important enough for me to want to invest the emotional investment in terms of making this work, then I think the financial investment sits alongside the emotional investment, to be perfectly honest.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks both. We are on the hour, so I'm going to bring things to a close by saying thank you to all of you for sticking with us. Thank you so much for your participation. I hope we've given you some food for thought about driving employee engagement, as well as positioning where 5Conversations can be a force for transformational change, really. There are a number of ways in which you could follow up, and I'll just move on to these. We have a dedicated website, that's the middle website, www.5conversations.co.uk, which has lots more information. And then at the bottom link, we'd love to talk to you, of course, to have an exploratory discussion if this is of interest to you. And we do offer a couple of different ways that you can experience 5Conversations through a sort of immersion session in more depth, either face-to-face or virtually. And we'd love to talk to you about those. So please don't hesitate to get in touch, and thank you again so much for giving up your time to attend today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.